Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to another wonderful ServiceAI webinar. This one's on ticketing triage and in general how it fits into the bigger picture, which is going to be nice. So we should probably get right to it, but as you might be able to tell, I'm preparing the last bits of my PowerPoint so I don't have to show my face the whole time, which is generally what people don't want to see. All right, let's get rolling. I think I started it on the hair, just a little bit being late. Let me share my screen and we can get started. All right, cool. Crystal, you're my angel in the background. Let me know if you can see my screen when I start sharing it before I start prattling on and nobody knows. You see that?
Yep, you're good.
Wonderful. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Full disclosure, I did something similar to this, but we got requests to kind of go over it again, kind of talk through it. We did a webinar specifically on triaging, but some of the feedback that we got back was just kind of talking about it in a bigger picture. The one I did was like a super deep dive on it. And I wanted to talk about how it works, what it does, what it doesn't do, just so you guys get the best possible idea of like what this platform is and how it's intended to work. So forgive me if you're repeat customers. You might get a lot of the same stuff with a little twist. If you're brand new, this might be a better one to watch than the other one because, again, I'm going to go over kind of the bigger picture stuff. And then, as usual, again, whether you've been in a webinar of ours or not, Crystal, who's in the background, is going to be helping me with question management because sometimes the chat goes oof. So if you have stuff, please drop it in there. I'll try to pause periodically, even though my brain doesn't really do that, and we'll try to get to it. So welcome to ConnectWise and Autotask. Hopefully you're one of those two. PSA using MSPs, getting affordable AI ticketing triage. So what are we doing? Okay, well, let's talk about it. So similar to what we talked about last time, we're going to talk about how it works. We're going to talk about the rules and tweaks, practical applications, and then effective foundations for leveraging AI. It's going to be a mishmash of a lot of stuff I talked about before, but specifically where this fits into like the general like AI strategy. I air quote that because a lot of people come to me and they say, "Hey, I want to do stuff with AI." And I go, "Me too. What do you mean?" And then they go, "I don't know. I thought you knew. I thought you're the guy, the vendor." And I was like, I don't know. But we have an idea now. Thanks, ServiceAI. So I always do my same spiel. If you've never seen ServiceAI or not super familiar, what is it? Well, we're going to take a look. And again, we're focused on triage, but in general, what ServiceAI is, it is a platform that is here to basically ingest your data from your PSA. And again, hopefully you're either Autotask or ConnectWise because that's where triage really shines, but it works with others too. It takes that ticketing data, it ingests it, it learns from it, it learns and builds kind of a database so that when we do actual AI stuff, what the AI in Service AI is doing is it's looking at your tickets, your processes from like documents and stuff and scoring them, but also giving you like an input output. So you can ask it questions and see how it responds based off of what you've fed it, right? So it's a whole strategy to figure out basically when people say, I want to do stuff with AI, where do you start, right? The first thing that we're saying is Service AI is going to help you kind of benchmark how good is AI going to be when it's running off of what you give it. And I actually just got off a webinar that, again, will come into play in this as well, that you can kind of get this feeling if you guys use your Chat GPTs, your Claudes, your Groks, your Geminis, whatever. What you notice, right, is that the AI is pretty good, but it's much better when it has context, which those things do automatically, right? They're building the context as you talk to it. So it might start off saying, hello, you say, my name's Ricky, and then the next time you talk to it, it says, hey, Ricky, right? Forever, because it built context on you. Same thing with Service AI. We're just jump starting that logic by bringing in your tickets, by bringing in your documents and kind of building that base to shortcut that. So we'll talk about where triage fits in, but that's generally Service AI's shtick. So we talk about this before. Same thing as a diagram. We're bringing in information again from these various sources, and we're outputting stuff, insights, sandbox, and then also we, eventually we'll integrate with chat because the purpose of this, regardless of how we ingest that data, is to make this data actionable, reportable, usable by your technicians to look through all of your tickets and your documentation without having to literally fly through your IT glue or whatever. And that's the idea. So I have even more slides on the approach or whatever, but I want to kind of break this out and go straight into the triage portion and how that fits in. Because when I pull up ServiceAI here, I'm going to be using ConnectWise, but Autotask is more or less the exact same thing. So there's not really a loss of functionality or like a caveat between one system or the other. Without going too deep into the ServiceAI meat, like you get this view that kind of shows you these scores that kind of gives you an idea of where you benchmark. So the first thing that you do when you first get ServiceAI is you hook up your PSA. That's the bare minimum, and it's going to spit back out scores. Now, these scores are called RPS scores, or relative performance scores. And what they're doing practically is they look at, for example, your tickets, which is a lot of what we ingest, and it's trying to score them on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is like no notes, absolutely perfect, and 0 is like, what happened here? Now, what it's specifically looking at is it's asking itself the question, can I figure out what happened? Can I figure out what happened in this tickets, right? So my go-to example, I think I've used it for every single webinar. It's good. I'll keep using it. Is if you put in a ticket that says like Outlook's not working or a user does, and then the answer from the tech is amazing, I fixed it. That's a terrible score because what the AI is looking at is like, yes, the ticket completed. Yes, the user was happy and stopped saying I'm angry. But the AI goes, I don't know what happened. I don't know what the issue was. I don't know what the resolution was. I just see that something happened. That's a bad score. Whereas if the ticket was like, Outlook's not working. I'm so sorry to hear that. Can you have any error codes or something? What's happening? They respond. The ticket, the tech works through it. You get a better sense. You get an understanding of where that all comes from. Higher score. I always pause to talk about RPS, even in a triage webinar where it's not really necessary because it's kind of the foundation of the tool, and you're going to see how that fits in the bill for everything else. But that's ticket RPS. Agent RPS is basically how your technicians are performing based off of etiquette and timeliness and thoroughness of their answers, yada, yada. And users is basically the same based off of the end users you support. So we have this big lofty vision to talk about Service AI as this kind of benchmarking tool and understanding and getting these scores to help you figure out how good AI is in your system already. And when you go in and you try to use it, you've got kind of one of the main use cases being this reporting. The second use case that we have for a lot of people is to try to get these answers, like I was saying before, summarize these technicians to get better answers such that when they go and ask questions, and again, inside of Autotask and ConnectWise, these things where I say like my Outlook's not working, let's say in the sandbox, and it spits out an answer is basically, again, the way I always tell people is like a chat GPT running inside of your PSA trained on your data. So it's not looking at anything generically. It's specifically looking at your past tickets, your past articles. You can see these down here, which is how it arrives at the answers. Now, again, just for the sake of time, I'm not going to dive too deep into that stuff because those are the main two things that Service AI does is brings in the answers, scores them, gets all those nice, pretty dashboards, helps to kind of summarize answers. But where's the uh-oh for me? The uh-oh for me is that when I usually try to showcase this in Peacock and go, look at what a cool AI tool I have, it works really, really well when I have tickets coming in that are something like this, right? When I have, here, I'll go back to my original fake ones that we built. Email not syncing with Outlook. AI is going to take that and go, that's a lot of, I know it's email, I know it's Outlook, I know it's not syncing. That's about as perfect as a title as you can for AI to start troubleshooting or unable to send emails. I don't know about you guys. Actually, I do. You're not getting those, right? Maybe you do from your best clients that are thorough, but the majority of tickets that I've seen in the field, right, in the actual real world, look more like, let me go to a real one, like this, broken. Hep me. That's a classic. Not working. Also classic, right? So why is that a problem? Well, if I'm trying to run a beautiful ticket thing and I'm saying the power of AI and AI is so cool, if it tries to run off of not working, not the best, not going to come up super good, right? And you can see that typically this is what a user normally does is they don't care about the subject because to them they reached out to you, right? Not working. I have the actual thing that says HP desk printer stop working and you have a meeting in 10 minutes. Help me, God. Oh my God. So one of the things that we did was we said, yes, look at this amazing ability to score these tickets and answer them and use the sandbox. But if you feed it garbage, garbage in, garbage out, it'll spit out crappy answers. It'll do a bunch of stuff. So Along the way, we said, hey, you know what's really useful on top of those two things is the triaging function. And this is something that we can do quite well for Autotask and ConnectWise. And it's something that is useful out of the gate because this is what I just talked about with my fellow friends in my past webinar I did an hour ago. A lot of times when you first set it up, you might notice that your scores are kind of abysmal because you're maybe just, I mean, again, just by nature of the beast, you weren't creating tickets 10 years ago thinking how thorough your notes should be for AI to learn them. That's okay. That's not a problem. This thing is meant to show you the benchmark before it touches clients, before it reaches out to them. But what people want to do is they want to get something useful now. They want to not just see the benchmark and figure out where they need to work on. They want to help make this thing a little bit smoother and get more information now. One of the easiest things we can do is helping with that dispatch, that triage. So where does that live? Well, if you have these two systems and you get into ServiceAI, there's a spot for triage. And this is what we're going to kind of focus on for the next little bit. I'll pause here for a second because I see a bunch of chats. I don't know if that's a bunch of questions or not, but Crystal, am I good to keep going or should I stop and answer something first?
We just been chatting, but the one question did come in that maybe you can address real quickly.
Please.
What are we using under the hood for a model and where/how is it hosted?
Great questions, both for security purposes and also just for general interest. So, model is a really interesting and important question, mostly for those that are aware of models. There's a lot of them. And again, I'll say this generically, pardon, because the person who asked that is probably like, I know, I asked. Models refers to, again, is it OpenAI, ChatGPT? Is it Anthropic's Claude? Is it Gemini, Google, whatever? We specifically are using OpenAI, but more specifically, Azure OpenAI. So if you don't know, you can look this up too. Microsoft really went ham on OpenAI. They chose that to be the backer. I don't really care. I don't particularly love one AI model over another. The real reason we went with Azure OpenAI under the hood is because Azure OpenAI has additional compliancy stuff that regular OpenAI does not. And a lot of the other models they might, but I'm not sure specifically about it. So Azure OpenAI under the hood, because that has like HIPAA, BAA stuff, and it has a little bit more protections, better redacting. And then what we do specifically is when we bring in your data, we are basically, again, functionally copying. In my case, you can see it with ConnectWise, works the same with any PSA. So this is not ConnectWise, could be Autotask, could be whatever. We get told which boards or queues we want to learn from. And then what we do is we basically download those onto a database. So we're basically building an LLM model using your tickets. And then when we let the AI run loose, this Azure OpenAI model, it's running loose in a closed network. It's just doing that. It's just looking at your stuff. It's not reporting stuff up. It's not teaching our master AI cool tips and tricks and master reporting. None of that. It's looking at your stuff. So really, the general idea from a data model perspective is we bring in the data, we let this AI build this giant database and parse it in 50 different ways to make sure that it's reading stuff properly down to the specific like X point X model. I think it's 4 point something, which even then, for those in the AI news, OpenAI is retiring. I can't remember if it's just 4.0 mini or 4 point somethings of their model because they want people to go to the next ones, the smarter ones, yada yada. We're in the process of that, but for right now, that's what we use. And again, it works pretty well. Good question. And a lot of very important questions come from how is that secured? Because whatever AI vendors you work with, this or anything else, please ask that question. Mostly because you don't want them going like, I don't know. Because if they say, I don't know, your data could be getting trained on and stuff. And we have a whole slew of stuff that says it's not getting trained on by a master model. Your data is in when you're here, gone when you're not. We don't retain any of it, all that stuff. We are literally just kind of helping build the shell you put in your stuff, and then that's it. Very important question. Good question. Please ask all your vendors that question too if they use AI. Am I good, Crystal, or should I anything else?
Yeah, I'm gonna just follow up on that. So are you saying that there's a dedicated open AI instance per partner?
No, I don't know. Well, maybe. I actually don't know the specifics of how it works. All I know is that they're all in their own isolated databases, and again, they don't talk to each other. So there may be. That's a my developer's question. All I know is that we don't uptrain, and then specifically we don't like it's not like they don't look at each other. So maybe I need to get the down to the specifics. Ask every single like high level or even super specific question, and we'll follow up with you because I'll probably need to get a dev to be like, this is exactly how it works. So I don't want to misspeak and freak people out.
Perfect, thanks.
Yeah. And again, please, I'm not going to blow you off. Like ask whatever you want, and we can always just talk about it specifically. Okay, so triage, where does that come in? Well, again, long-winded way, but you got all these cool fancy technologies, and they are cool, but they're garbage if what comes into the system isn't very good. So where does triage fit in? Well, you can see even in mine, what we're doing is that we're basically just going selfishly, we want the ticket quality input to be as good as possible because that gives us not only the best chance at matching the user queries to your documents, your tickets, your everything, but it's also just something really helpful because a lot of MSPs have dispatchers, they have people sitting and just doing the modification of tickets. That's something that like they should be managing and not necessarily doing manually. And I'll speak technically to this before we look at the example. What's technically happening with Autotask and ConnectWise is those tickets are going to get fired off to us from the PSAs. And then what's going to happen is when we look at the tickets coming in, we are letting the AI kind of get the information back of what's possible. So if I get a ticket that says, again, we'll keep beating Outlook over and over again. If I get a ticket that says Outlook's not working, what ServiceAI is going to do is it's going to say Outlook is a Microsoft issue. You have a type for that. You have a subtype of software, and maybe you have a subtype of Outlook. I'm going to make my best guess. So out of the box, without having to touch anything, we're basically just receiving oodles of data over what's possible, and we're just going, the AI is going, I'm going to make that decision. So what you're looking at on screen right now, we'll go through the options just so you really get it, is you typically start off like this. I'm going to go in the background. You can see that it's off. Now, when you turn it on, it typically would look like this, right? Aside from making sure it's connected properly, you have this thing that is in test mode. When you first run it, you really want to try it out in test mode. You want to make sure that you agree, you like, you have a chance to look at the decisions it makes before you say, start making your best guesses and start changing stuff in my PSA, which is what we don't want. So test mode is nice. If you get more confident, you can always flip it off. And that is the difference between it actually modifying the tickets versus it just saying what it would have done. I'm obviously doing it for real, so that's cool, but you probably want to start out with test mode. Now, there's a whole section for rules, and these are going to be really useful and really cool. I'll skip them for now, and we're going to come back to this area, and I'm going to treat this webinar almost like a mini implementation of how I look at it. So we'll come back to these. I'll purposely browse or skip over them. Priority alert keywords is exactly what you would expect, right? This thing can modify ticket priority if you let it. And if you want it to, you can say like, hey, no matter what, if somebody even mentions Bitcoin or mentions encrypted or hacked or breached or whatever, automatic bump it priority. To what? Well, we'll talk about that. It's going to do its best guess. But if you want it to say, hey, if you hit any of these and you want it to go to P0, we can train it to do that. I'll show that later. Cool things. Automatic field updates is basically what do you want it to touch? What fields do you want it to modify? Now, if you're trialing it out, if you're testing it out, all of them, because who cares, right? You just want to see what this thing's got. So I always recommend firing everything. In practice, the MSPs that I work with that are really into it and they have a specific thing that they're like, I really want a tool that only touches category and type and subject, but not priority, never priority. You can play with that to make sure that it's only really touching what you want. And we'll come back to that too. Most importantly, especially when you first start out, it's this guy. It's monitored boards and queues. So because you're my Autotask and ConnectWise folk and I don't have a billion different PSAs to support, more or less the same thing here. Basically saying when you set up ServiceAI in general, forget triage for a second, guys. When you first set it up, you are asking it to learn from boards and queues for that scoring that I talked about, for that assistance. So you might have a really great, single point of contact board, a tier one board, working through the problems board or queue or whatever. Great. You do not have to have triage running on that same system because I've worked with plenty of MSPs that have the good juice, for lack of a better term, on those. And they have their like, again, let's call it a triage board or queue that its job is just to receive and then stuff gets sent off. They don't have to be the same. So in my case, they totally can be the same, but they don't have to. So we almost treat triage almost like such a different feature that it's like its own little mini product inside of Service AI, but it still talks to it, right? So in my case, I'm doing Azure support. Obviously, what happens, and this is like a data tip, right? You don't necessarily want Service AI to be running and doing triaging on everything because You can do your best to clean up your boards and queues, right? I have Azure support. I may have a dedicated like RMM alerts board or queue. I may have a dedicated backup alerts or board or queue. I don't want to waste a bunch of time on the AI renaming my backup alerts. Nobody cares about those. So ideally, you just don't have it looking at that board or queue. But sometimes, and this happens all the time, they come in to the main one or the one that also client stuff comes in. So that's why ignore tickets exists. When you go to ignore tickets, this is one of the very first things I advise people to do as well, is I say, hey, you've got your main board or queue, cool. Just drop in the Huntress alert or whatever. So what I'm doing here is by throwing this in there, what it's going to do is it's actually a prompt. If it's going to spot a ticket that says Huntress alert, it's going to go, I'm not going to bother triaging that. Like, forget it, which is good because you don't want to, again, waste a bunch of time or maybe even rename something that is very specifically named that kicks off workflows. So there's lots of reasons why you might want to ignore tickets. Lastly, I don't run into this too often, but when I do, it's really sweet. If you have a spam board or queue, most MSPs I work with typically just delete stuff outright or they ignore stuff or something. They deal with it where it lands. So if I get crap in Azure support, gone by. But some MSPs really like the idea of quarantining or just, decrapifying stuff and going like, we'll look at that later if we need to. Why is that important? Well, the way that I've seen it practically, so I'm turning this into like again, onboarding, is if I'm advising people to do it, one of the other really useful ones is like a sales. People a lot of times have like a sales board, sales queue that they get inquiries and stuff. And 99% of the time, the crap that you get that are like offers or spam requests or people going like, oh, I noticed you have a website. Would you like me to do SEO for you? Lands somewhere in sales. Sometimes it can land in the main one too. But it's just nice to be able to say, look at these queues, quarantine stuff over there. You don't have to, but what happens is if, let's say, a spam ticket lands on my Azure support board, what it's going to do by default, if you don't have this thing on, is it'll just ignore it. It'll just go, spam ticket, don't bother. It's not going to rename your spam tickets to make them look legit. That would be counterproductive. If you define something, it'll move them. If you don't, it'll ignore them. That is all. And it'll show you that it caught one up. So it's a lot of talk. Let's actually see this thing work through. It's a lot easier to see when it's in motion, but these are the various settings. There's not a billion things to triage. So part of the thing that we talked about is that we are aware that there is a triaging function inside of the respective PSAs. I think pretty much everyone has them now. There's a mix of what we're doing now, what we want to do, and where we want to take this, but I'm going to show you guys what we're doing now. We'll use a little bit of the time on this to what's coming. And this is a lot of the what's coming stuff is based off of my own interactions with our partners, some of the feedback we've gotten, some of the paths that we can open up to. So we'll get to all that. But triage coming in. So we know in this case, we have Azure support as a board. We know that I've got this triage log over here. So what is this? Well, whether you're running it for real or whether you're running it in test mode, in my case, I'm doing it for real, you can actually see the history of the triage as it's happened. So why that's important is, again, when you first start it, you're not going to let this thing run rampant. You're going to run it on triage or test mode. And then what you're going to do is you're going to just go do what you want. You can customize it at the beginning. You don't have to. When I go to click on a ticket, let's do this one from Steven, right? This is one I did a while ago, almost a month ago. I have been testing it, right? So I have this actual ticket. We can go see it. Let me double check something real quick. Okay, cool. So this ticket existed. It made its way in here. I can click it. It's also logged inside of ServiceAI. So again, treating ServiceAI almost like a different product than Triage. What I'm going to do is before we look at this deeply, I'm going to look at this ticket. So you can see that this is the actual ticket. We synced it over from ConnectWise. Its title sucks. It's just called assistance. So it got abysmal scores as well, to no fault of anybody, because again, these are fake tickets, but terrible ticket RPS, meaning the note quality is terrible, terrible technician behavior because they didn't help, and the user basically is nothing. So if you look at it, basically all that Steven did is basically said, I've run out of printer toner and it's called assistance. That would be an example of a legitimate ticket that's made its way to our desk from a legitimate user to a legitimate company. So what did Triage do? It took that and it said, hey, I'm able to discern who submitted it. I'm able to discern that they ran out of printer toner. Is it spam? A lot of the spam calculations are based off of what is the request? Is this guy urgently saying, please wire me money? That's not great. Is it also maybe from an unknown sender, right? So that spam detection is pretty accurate. It's pretty good. And what it does is it gives you kind of a confidence. So 99% spam percentage is not, I think I should probably talk about changing that. It's not 99% spam. It's 99% sure of whether it is or isn't spam. So it's 100% sure, basically, that it's not. There's no routing changes, so I'm not telling it to chuck this off to a different border queue. That's why that says it. There's no dedupe. If there was a duplicate and you saw this, it would say, hey, this is a duplicate of this, this, and this. The power of AI, right? It's able to look at all your tickets and kind of look at that. This is the money right here. This is what people want it for. So field classification is where it tells you its respective decisions. So it says instead of assistance, I would have said assistance needed for printer toner replacement. Cool. The fields all came in blank. So it would have said printer. In my case, I have both the category and the subtype printer, and then even the hardware subcategory, and then estimated time of half an hour. So this is with me doing zero customizations because what it did was it received a bunch of information from ConnectWise. Again, Autotask works the same way. We receive everything, and the AI just goes, this, boom. And then it would tell you, right? No assignments. I didn't send it to anyone. If the ticket was updated or not, and obviously not, it's in test mode. That's the gist. Fundamentally, every ticket that I'm going to show you follows that same logic. So what's cool about it is, again, you turn it on, you're in test mode, you run that, and you take a look at how it behaves. And a lot of the tickets that I have in my own triage thing are more or less the same thing, right? I have this one called Hello There. Let's go take a look at that one. I'll do it a little bit quicker just because you probably get the idea. Camtasia is crashing constantly. All right, hello there, my Camtasia is crashing constantly. Maybe due to an update, seems stuck in a loop. Now, this one originally was called Hello There, but I clicked on it and the subject isn't Hello There. It's Camtasia's crashing constantly. So what happened? Well, this one's not in test mode. So this one, again, was able to successfully understand that it was an issue. It was able to go through everything. It was able to say, I think it should be Camtasia's crashing constantly. I believe it's an application. It's reactive. It's software. I always complain about time. I think AI has no concept of time. Sometimes a fix to reset a server takes 14 seconds, and sometimes troubleshooting a mouse with no batteries takes 50 hours. AI is a little wrong with how long human labor takes. We're working on that too, but just FYI. We can correct it too for now. But you can see the difference between the one I showed you before and the one happened now. It says changes applied to the PSA. It gives you a time to process and it gives you a basically a little quick checklist of the fields it updated. Now, if it runs into something, because again, in my case, I'm also letting it modify priority, it's not always going to show me the full list of every single thing. Because a lot of times what happens is if it agrees or has no notes over how it came in, because I know a lot of MSPs have workflows that, like, again, let's say you had the priority one that we were talking about before. Somebody says, I got a Bitcoin request from my bank. You may already have workflow rules in Autotask and ConnectWise that say, oh my God, sound the alarm, priority zero, must, or, P1, P10, whatever, must investigate, whatever. This thing, if it notices that and goes, yeah, I would have done that too, it's not going to show you that priority. So a lot of times that's something else that comes up in implementations going, is this thing not actually looking at priority? It may come in just fine. So how do we test it? How do we give this a proper demo? Well, what we can do is inside of ConnectWise, I should be able to create a ticket outright and we should be able to see it get generated. So in my ConnectWise, I'm going to go to this administrative thing. And what I'm looking for is I have this Azure support board and I want this thing to process. I think that's boring because when I create tickets in here, again, as long as a ticket is created in your PSA, the specific flow of timeline is ticket gets created, webhook gets fired to ServiceAI with all the information. We get the information, we fire something back, we make the changes, or at least do the theoretical changes. I don't like doing it in the PSA when I do these webinars because a lot of times, and you may have the same thing, like you may have mandatory fields, which stops me from looking cool because I might have to tell it to put a type and subtype, and then you guys get to see it change the subject, and it's like, eh. So what I'll do instead is something more interesting. I did this on my last webinar. It's to give you ideas of the breadth of how you can use something like this, right? So you can see on here that I have a type of break fix and proactive and reactive and warranty, and I have different subtypes depending on those, right? So server, and then I have internal feedback. Mine's a disaster. I really hate doing it. I probably should clean it up. It's just to show you that I have stuff in here. So if I go into like break fix, I have internal feedback for that one too. Ugh, doesn't matter. I prefer to show you a real use case of how a lot of people do it. So what I get from a lot of people is I had a diagram here, but it ends up being too convoluted. And I'll talk about this in terms of the client portal as an example. So when you have a triaging tool like ServiceAI or really any one of them, what it's doing obviously is it's taking the ticket as it reaches the PSA and it is specifically going to take it and modify it and do whatever it needs to do at the PSA level. So whenever it hits the PSA and makes it onto your board, that's when it kicks off and does its stuff. So why do I bring that up? Well, how does the ticket make its way to the PSA? Could be emailed, could be through a portal submission, like I have pulled up the CloudRadial portal, right? Separate product, separate webinar probably, but that's one way. Could be through a chat, could be through a carrier pigeon. I really don't know, right? However you allow tickets to get submitted, the hope, the dream is that somehow, right, if you're billing through this, if you're doing your work, you're logging them in the PSA, some form of format in general. So triage doesn't actually care about how they come in. It's just it knows that they come in a certain way. So that's both negative and helpful. So negative, and this is part of our feature stuff, is we want to make sure that we're triaging stuff that comes from appropriate sources. So one of the things we're working on, for example, is to filter it to not triage or specifically triage by source. Maybe you only want it to touch email-based submissions. Right now it does everything, but that ability to filter down is something else we're working on, just FYI. But why I bring it up is because most of the time, like think about your client portal, right? And I'll use ours, but it really applies to anyone. If you look at how a user might interact with a form, right? Whether you use an online form, a client portal, whatever, you probably have a pretty good output of that form. So you can see as a user, I come into this printer and scanner issue, and if I click on it, it's pretty good, right? I know what the user's intent is because I have a form called printer and scanner issues. There's not much mystery. So in this case, like I already got a pretty good head start, leg up on the nature of the issue. I don't really have the even opportunity to get an issue that says help or assistance. I know it's going to be a printer and scanner issue. You lose that luxury the more lax the channel goes. You lose that a little bit when you go to chat. So even for us, we do the AI chat, and what it's doing specifically is it's going to ask questions, right? It's going to do that thing where someone says need help. It's not going to go, sure, we logged you a ticket. It's going to go, help with what? Because it's trying to do that homework for you. The place where we get completely bypassed, email, right? How are you going to stop an email? An email can get sent that says help, please fix, and we can't do anything. That's why MSPs generally hate it because it's the fastest way to submit a ticket and it's also the crappiest way to get information. I don't need to tell you that. I built a career off of trying to solve the problem. I know. But triage is interesting. Again, anyone, but obviously this is because it sits at that layer. So I do all this big spiel to say you can get creative about how you apply this functionality. Now, what I like to do is I build a category called webinar example. Let me go in and actually do it on behalf of a user. I have a generic admin. I really should be more prepared for my own webinars, guys. I'm sorry. I'm the worst. John Customer seems like a real guy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let's go to the report a problem. Again, this is not a CloudRadial UCP webinar, but I want to showcase some of the interesting stuff. And as I come into this webinar example, what I'm going to do is I am going to make sure it routes to the board that I know it's looking at. So I know Azure Support is that triageable board. That's the one we actually want to do stuff on. Now, whether I emailed it in, and I don't do it because, again, I don't really have good connections. You guys have legit ones that you can always pretend your client. But I'll do this. I'll come in, I'll call the category webinar example. I'll call the thing help purposefully. The subject is going to be help. The description is going to be a new ticket. We don't need to include that. And then like, here's your generic stuff, right? Here is where the user inputs their issue. Now, what I'll do is I'll do a really simple dropdown. So I'll say it's a multi-choice dropdown. It doesn't need to be the subject, but it does need to be required. So in this case, I'm going to say printer issue, or we'll do file issue, or we'll do security issue, just those simple ones. So that's cool. That works. So why do I do all this? Well, now what I've done is John Customer is going to click on that form and it's going to submit to that specific thing, right? So if I come in here and I say, I'm going to say, oop, I did both. Both of my forms turned out to be multi-selects. I should have changed that. Let's destroy this one. This is when I try to get cute and right before the webinar, before I hit start, I'm like, I better set this up. Never works. Okay, here we go. This is going to be a little bit more realistic. So what I've done is I basically did a drop down that says, what's the issue? Uh, right? This is a pretty rude form if I'm a user, because I got a form that now says, pick the main issue. It's a security issue. What's the issue? So I'm going to say, my computer is popping up a warning saying to click here to download Bitcoins for free. Great. What do we expect to happen? Well, obviously you're gonna have to watch this kind of quick. So if you're got me in the background and you want to really see this, this is where I'm going to show you what it does. I'm going to hit submit, and this is exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to walk through the steps pretty quick. And the reason I have to say that disclaimer of like, watch me, is because this usually takes anywhere from like 5 to like 13 seconds. So I usually go like here, here, here. The point of it is to be fast, right? Because we don't want this thing to take 2 minutes, 3 minutes for it to like really decide. So this guy's going to get his ticket submitted. I'm going to switch to ConnectWise and verify that the ticket made it exactly as I told it to. Then what I'm going to do is we're going to kind of watch ServiceAI. We're going to wait for it to pick it up, and it's going to do its changes. And again, we're going to have about a 15-second window, more or less, that's on average, for it to do it. So let me just make sure I'm good to go inside of ConnectWise. Okay, cool. So here goes. So submit, we're looking for that ticket submission. Boom, done. We're going to refresh this. Help. So remember, the reason I'm doing this quick too is because I have ServiceAI changing stuff on mine. I don't have it in test mode. So you can see that it hasn't changed yet. Security issue, help, computer is popping up. It made its way over here. Awesome. So I'm safe for a second. Now, if I go to ServiceAI and I go back to that triage area and I like to refresh my app so it shows up with the stuff, again, it just depends on how fast the webhook is to fire back over here. So we're going to give it a second. If it's actually making changes, hey, look at that. It's going to take a second for it to, it takes a little bit longer than test mode because it actually has to reach out and update. We'll see if it actually does it. Make sure, make sure, make sure. Keep her going. This is my favorite part of the webinars too, where I just go, and, hang on, and wait a minute, keep going. Although, now that I look at it between me and you guys, I think mine may be busted. It hasn't done a triage since 2.5, so I may need to come back to it. Did it do it though? Let's see if it maybe didn't report it. Failure. Oh well, I'll have to use my old examples. Pardon my failures, fellas or ladies. What it should have done is updated it on the fly. I'll go look at an old one. Maybe my triage server needs to be reset. Again, don't love that it hasn't fired off in a month. Probably since my last webinar on this. Same. We can take a look at the same exact examples and say like customer removed systems and smart forms. You get the idea. It's just making the changes as needed. What I showed you, and I did it successfully in the last one, so at least we have a working example of it working, is it just takes that and it's make its best assumption. Now, I can still prove of what I usually work through with other people. Now, when it comes through, you may dig it, you may not. And that is a really important thing to look at. So I work with a lot of customers and they come in and they will use Steven's ticket on printer toner. They come in and they look at this and they go, that's just not right. Like, yes, it's hardware, but I prefer it to use a different subtype or whatever. So then what do? Is I go to my settings and I go to my triage and I correct. When you first start out with it, you don't need to do this because again, you're just trying to evaluate how it actually works. So what you actually end up wanting to do is you want to categorize it. So you can see that in mine, I've added a rule, right? That says if you see a ticket relating to this, make it this subtype. So you can actually correct it. That's why test mode is pretty useful because again, you're going to let it build 5, 10, 20 decisions, however much you're comfortable with, before you add these corrections. Now, I work with, again, real customers using this in active mode. One of the more interesting cases, I don't know if you're on this webinar, but if you are, you know who you are, that I worked with was they really have a really intricate system of Autotask time assignments. And what they do is they basically have a list of if it's printer toner, if it's fixing a piece of software, if it's resetting a password or whatever, they have all of these minute things going like that's a half hour, that's an hour, that's 2 hours, that's whatever, because they're trying to keep their billables like straight. So why does that matter for us? Well, what I did with him is we tested it out. And again, it's far too intricate for a webinar, but this is to give you an idea. It doesn't just have to be like what I'm doing, where you just go make X, Y. Like that's the lamest version. What he did is he has a big fat rule that says if it's any of these subtypes, set the time to this amount. If it's any of these, set the time to this amount. One of the things that I'm working on is chaining these different rules together. So right now, ServiceAI is good enough to categorize, to route, right? So if I say send all printer tickets to so and so, or this board, I can do the so and so versus assignment rules. That's where you actually put it to a technician. If I want to go ahead and chain them, right? That's what we want to kind of get to. So we're going to start doing stuff where you say, if it's below an hour, send it to John. If it's above an hour, send it to Bill. So the next things that are coming immediately based off of a lot of our feedback are improvements in our labeling. I know our labeling is kind of all over the place. So if you're an existing ServiceAI member going like, I'm going to join this webinar and see if this guy's got stuff. Some of the issues that we see is that some of the labeling is generic. So like if you've been watching the webinar and you're kind of looking over my shoulder and you're like, what's classification? It maps to a field. Sometimes it's not super clear. So we have that as an upcoming thing to change. We have the kind of talking through it, making sure that we can order them in the right stage. And the source thing is another really popular one. And I'll talk about why source is so important. Source exclusions or inclusions matter a lot because a lot of times what happens, even in my own example, you saw, if I put in a ticket and I have all this wonderful work done into making sure that the subject is just the way I like it, the last thing I want is an AI thing coming in and going, no, 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 let me just rename that thing for you. So we have some different things that we're kind of working on. What Service AI is and where it kind of ends for triage is about that level of power. I don't think we're super interested in going super deep and making this some kind of a workflow magic rule, because the reality is everything I spent the first 20 minutes talking about is the real bread and butter of Service AI, right? It's about trying to get the scores listed and trying to get the insights, trying to get the technician assistance in those pods or whatever else. So keep in mind that the main focus for us is yes, we want to help triage something. Yes, we want to make sure that it is coming in and saving time with the identification, but it's also not necessarily something we want you to say that's the product. Like that's the thing. Because again, objectively, as we look at the big picture, it doesn't really matter to me or us whether you get that automatic triaging and cleanup from us or another tool or whatever have you. What matters to me most is that you have good data that we can run off of, because that is going to be what we can run the best resolution and tickets off of. So there's not that much to triage, honestly, right? It really is just a thing that you turn on and off, and then you test it, and then you experiment with it. And the big launch point is once you like the output enough, you basically just flip test mode off and hit go, and you're going to go. Not in my case, because obviously mine's broken in my test one, but in general, that's how it works. I can't recall, Crystal. I believe there was something else I needed to show per the webinar invite. Let me double check it. But as I look at that, can you please tell me if there's anything I should review or take a look at?
We,
Question-wise.
yeah, there's a lot of questions.
Okay.
And like I put in the chat, if we don't get to all of them, because there is a lot and great questions, everybody, we will try to send out an FAQ or some type of way to get you guys the information. So the first question, I think this was also in another webinar, but I'm not sure if we got to it or not. But will Service AI support a custom OpenAI based URL?
So I got that question from you emailed too, and I had asked my developers, they didn't get back to me. But from what I understand, I was like, I don't know. And this is the same, I think it's the same answer I gave during the ChatGPT versus AI one that spawned that one. The question is basically like, can I feed it into a different model? Can I feed it into something else? And the answer is like, I'm not sure. We might not. The only reason I say might not is because frankly, it's like a term-based question. There's no technical reason why we can't do that. In fact, it's relatively straightforward, just going, we built this thing, you pipe in whatever you want. Right now, we are the ones saying OpenAI model 4.7, 5.2, whatever, runs on this. That question for everybody else, obviously, I know the person who's asking knows what they're talking about. Can you bring in your own stuff? And a lot of AI tools allow you to do this for flexibility. But when I say it's a terms thing, is I want to make sure that when you do it, you're aware of doing it, right? And you make sure you don't bring in anything else. Because if you bring in your own AI model and you pipe it back and then that gets breached, I would like to avoid a lawsuit, please. So that's basically all that is. It's just making sure that the due diligence is done such that the security is good enough to make sure it's basically like, hey, if something goes wrong with your model, you're on the hook for it. So where that ends up, this is as close as I can get you to an answer without officially saying an answer until I talk to somebody more technical than me. The answer is there's no technical reason why not. I'm more than happy to, because again, I think that if you've built something cool or if you worked with something and you think that you've got something that blows this out of the water, but you like the data set, I'm happy to. It's just a how does that work? What does it look like? And then again, terms wise. But I'm advocating for you for what it's worth behind the scenes because I see the use case for it and I think it's a pretty cool thing to be able to bring in your own. That's that's the most official answer I can give you until I get a better one. But I have you on my radar too for responses.
I think that's a good answer. Okay, so I'm gonna give you a kind of an easier one before we get to some complicated questions.
Sure.
Can Service AI be configured to work in other languages other than English?
Amazingly, the answer is a yeah, and like it's not even hard, which I say this really tentatively because I've had this question myself. Now, obviously, the UI in Service AI is in English, and that's not a limitation really. It's just because we support it. But I've come into a lot of instances where, somebody perhaps commonly with my French Canadians, because we work with a lot of Canadians that do that. We work with European companies. I work with some Germans. I work with some Dutch people that they run a multilingual shop, but they have maybe like a Dutch only client or a French only client or an Italian only client. So what you do in that case is there's always a spot under your settings, your rules, and this governs the outputs. So this is more of a thing both for how triage gets interpreted, because this is going to govern some triage stuff, but really it's more in-app, inside stuff. So a tangible example. If I come in here and I say my mouse won't connect to my PC, what's going to happen? Well, obviously it's just going to respond back. Nothing special. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait for it to respond just to show what we expect. And then you get to see this on the call. And if you want me to do something else, we can always talk through it. So if I change my mind, and I could go to that rules area, I could also just chuck in rules directly from here. And I'm going to say, respond back only in Italian. I happen to speak Italian. It's easy for me. But something else you can do as well is you can, I've done it as far as like conditional. So basically, if the input is in English, respond in English. If the input's in Italian, respond back in Italian. In my case, I'll just do full Italians. All right, respond back only in Italian. So same thing. I'm going to answer in English. We're going to try that again. I might need to restart the conversation. Maybe it'll pick it up. We'll see. Oh, come on, my friend. Ciao, sembra che tu stai ancora riscontrando dei problemi col tuo mouse che non... Yep, it works, right? So it's really just the matter of telling it specifically how you want to. So even from an AI control perspective for languages, I'm not going to lie and say I've checked every nook and cranny, but for that base level of like, can it specifically respond in this or can it keep track of these rules? Same thing for triage, since this is a triage webinar. If you come back in here and you add a rule saying like, hey, don't change my, or like, keep the subjects in French. Or if they come in English, keep them in English, whatever. Same rules apply here. If you categorize them as such, it will retain them as such. I've tested it again with a couple of my international clients. Seems to work out pretty well, but certainly something we'd want to look at. That's my spiel.
I think that was a good one. Okay, so we have a couple requests. If it says, I would like to see how it identifies related tickets. And it seems like we have a couple people who want to see that.
Sure. So, what's the best way to show this one? Related tickets is fun because what it's actually doing is fairly intricate and it makes sense. But what it's doing when we look at, let's see if I could do a past one, I could do a current one. We'll do this scanner one. It's hard for me to do this question, not because it's impossible, but because I have 162 tickets and I think like 90 of those are AI generated slop, just as so I had something in there because obviously I'm not going to bring in real data. So let's look at this one. My scanner's not recognizing my computer, whatever. You see, this is what I'm talking about when I say slop. Because when we generated the tickets initially, it just was like, here's a bunch of tickets, and it just generated even a lot of them that are the same name. But what it's doing is when you ask it the question, obviously it interprets the prompt. And then what it's also running through is it's going to go look at the tickets that both match the keyword, obviously, like at the title, if it literally is scanner not recognized, versus your articles that cover those issues. Now, in a practical term, again, I really wish I could show real data from MSPs, but I will not do that. What would happen is even if the subject obviously contains the keywords, or if the subject of the details of the ticket pertains to that, that's how it basically hits a match. So weirdly enough, not weirdly, it makes sense, but funny enough, like we have this separate functionality to Service AI for the AI analysis, because aside from the specific desk, responses that we're doing, we also do an analysis to try to come up with like root cause or products or classification. So same mechanism that it's doing here. When I'm at this AI analysis spot, it's looking at all of your tickets because again, we built your database, right? We built it of this ticket, this is the subject, this is the description, this is the update, yada yada yada. Well, obviously, AI can look at that stuff in fractions of a second. So when even I look at like the root cause or the products or whatever, and I go to click on, let's do Outlook 2019 as a good example. I just did this. It says that it found in the last, well, all time, that I had 3 tickets that had an issue with Outlook 2019 specifically. This is the same, again, logic as the related tickets. Now, when I click on that, it's going to show me those 3 tickets, and you're going to see that there is not an obvious link to Outlook 2019. Like, yes, this one says not syncing in Outlook. This one says email sending issues. But if I actually click in on it and I look down, right, let's just do a quick search for 2019. David used this note that says, I'm using Outlook 2019. Same logic in the chat. So what it's doing in a fraction of a second is when it goes to answer the question, my mouse won't connect, whatever, it is basically trying to match the intent, the keywords, and everything else, not just to the subject, but to the nature of the ticket, to the responses, to the back and forth, and it is going to list those related. Now, the other thing you're going to see is the confidence percentage. This one says like my mouse won't connect to the PC and it says computer won't start 39%. So if I go to click on this one, does this say anything about a mouse? Nope, not at all. So this is the equivalent of a hallucination potential because what it's doing is it goes like computers connect to mouse or mouse connect to computer rather, maybe. So it's not super confident in this. So it tries to give you something. It always tries to give you at least the top 5 relevant. Now, if you've got super relevant stuff that matches by keyword, awesome. But it is looking intricately at the different things to try to generate that. In addition, optionally but heavily recommended is the articles, right? So in this case, it goes like, there may be some stuff on connection. So I can tell you logically what it's doing is it went mouse is a thing, PC, computer is a thing, won't connect is a thing. So it started to look through everything going like, all right, this one's an AirPod connectivity. That's a won't connect relation. It's not super relevant, 35%, but it tries to find the nuggets of knowledge in various tickets and articles that are most relevant to, again, say like, you know what? Bluetooth drivers is a consistent thing, whether it's AirPods or mouse or headphones or whatever. That may be one of those things that it's running into. So the connection between the resources and what it recommends is based off of, again, relevancy, recency, and also just in general, like contextual match. Same logic we use in the tickets is the same logic you end up doing for AI analysis, trying to figure out, is an Outlook 2019 an issue specifically? Well, again, we can't just look at titles. We have to figure out the context throughout everything else. Hopefully that helps understand.
I think it does. Does it currently, or is it on the roadmap to show related tickets to the same company?
It actually, good question. It does do that, and it actually weighs. This is what we're getting into, like the weight algorithm scoring. So when you go to do a ticket specifically, and this is like a total non-triage anything, but when you go to do a ticket for a company, I've talked about this in previous webinars before. I'm bringing up articles because it's the same logic. You look at like an article sync, and in this case, I don't know if I have anything really interesting in here. Probably not. Yeah, not really. So I have this one that says like article source. You can see that I have a couple articles from IT Glue and from CloudRadial or whatever. So with articles, what we do is if we can match documentation to a company, we do, right? So IT Glue is pretty easy for that, right? In IT Glue and a lot of documentation systems, I can say this article is created for digital efforts, creating an app password in Office 365. I click on it. Whatever information is in here is specifically relevant to digital efforts. So when I ask the AI chat sandbox like this, you can see what it looks like on screen. It doesn't have anything. It just is this big white thing that just is like, ask me a question. Now, when I go into a specific company like Benepartum Law Group, I can do this from within ServiceAI, and I can do an AI chat, and you can see this blue banner that says impersonating for Benepartum Law Group. What I'm actually doing here is I am now kind of, not totally, kind of restricting that flow. And it makes the most sense in articles, but it works for tickets too. When I do this restriction, the scoring mechanism changes. The generic kind of weighs everything like fair game. If I had an article specifically for this Benepartum law group, it will not get referenced in the global search. That's a security thing, really, because again, you might have sensitive information that aren't factors for this specific support. If I did have articles for Benepartum, they would be included in the fair game to look at these articles to include it. Same thing with tickets. Like, of course, it's going to look at generic stuff. And like, I do kind of bad examples on webinars if I got to critique myself, because a lot of the webinar stuff I do is like Outlook issue, my batteries, just because I don't have time or really the knowledge to be like, this server for this company and this IP is having issues, which is how realistic stuff works. But if you get to more of that use case, then this thing is going to start restricting and really going like, what do we have? It's going to prioritize Benepartum stuff over the generic. It'll still take the generic into account, but it for sure will do that. So again, it's easier to prove or talk about with articles because you can literally see a thing that says IT glue, digital efforts. Okay, this one factors in, but so yes, fancy way of saying the scoring does change. It's just kind of tricky to showcase in a webinar unless I've got my ducks in a row. Good question though, and very important because it's kind of annoying to show in the web app as well, but when you're actually doing the do inside of the PSA, you don't have that problem, right? So even if I'm in here and I'm doing this one service ticket, I already know it's Azure Technology. I already know it's John Customer. So what's getting served up in Pod or in Insight, if you're an Autotask, same exact thing. The difference is I still get that summary if I want to, and those related tickets and articles, if I had any, would show up here as well, and I could just click on them and reference the number and stuff too. So a little bit more work, a little bit more annoying for me to show in the web app, but easier and more natural when you're actually working with it, so it matches stuff better. Good question.
Okay, so I know we're kind of running out of time, but since this is a ConnectWise webinar, I think we should go ahead and answer this one. So what does ServiceAI do for you that ConnectWise and Zofig won't do, since ConnectWise just bought them out and is developing it internally? How are we differentiating ServiceAI from them?
Well, there's a couple of different major ways, and then there's minor ways, and there's some that are probably going to be like the same. So ConnectWise's dev cycles are famously not the best, but that's not necessarily something we can live on forever because a lot of times what we do is being a smaller vendor, we're not nothing, but we're smaller than ConnectWise. A lot of the stuff is down to like agility, right? So again, if you say do this, like I got you. That's one of the more practical ways I can do it. The bigger thing that we do though is that on top of this, like we never really try to look at our tools in a bubble. So when we talk about, and it's kind of the same reason why I brought up the portal, you don't have to have the full CloudRadial suite of every product to get the max value out of it. But our vision is fundamentally different than the PSA stuff. When they look at triaging and whatnot and insights, they are trying to focus on what they're good at, which is making sure the tickets are good and maybe even getting you some reporting for the purpose of something similar to this, where they go, hey, would you like us to apply the type? Or here's some interesting reporting based off of your type of the various tickets that you've gotten. Our vision bigger picture is to take that information. Yes, I want to offer you short term the triaging. Yes, I want to offer you the insights, but I have three different things I can interlink. I have this, which is like the intelligence center. I have a client portal, which is again the UI UX for paying customers. And then I also have a chat bot. So these things are more interesting to me because our goal as a company is to try to make the best client experience possible. PSAs, this is not a knock. This is me saying what I've talked to ConnectWise about, doesn't care about the client experience because they're in the business of making you more profitable, making you more visibility or whatever in relation to your day to day. So the biggest difference fundamentally is that what we do for Service AI is really centered around client visibility, client service, and client satisfaction. So why I brought up the client portal is that when someone chats with this, doesn't do it yet, this is what we're building, is we want the chat from, let's say I'm in the portal. I know I'm this guy. Hi, Azure Dev admin. You can see why I'm mousing up here. Hi, Azure Dev. What issues are you having with? If I verify it, then what I have in Service AI is I have a running history of that user. I have a running history of the articles they're allowed to see and not allowed to see, and additional resources potentially that they have in their portal. So the bigger dish, I would think, the bigger thing that I've seen is that your PSAs are after, again, efficiency and quickness in that type of triage, where we are after quickness, relevancy, better user experience, trying to give them kind of a more quick, faster, better AI experience by knowing who they are and serving them up better. And again, saying this is part of the plan to be able to say, hey, if they come in and they say, I have an issue with Outlook, rather than going, fantastic, I've logged the ticket and I've made it an Outlook subtype. fine. But maybe the issue should be like, well, I see that you've put in 10 Outlook tickets in the last week. Did you know you have courses? You may need some training. So the level of intelligence I want to do is more focused around keeping the client in the loop and you visible in how it works. So again, on the surface, you're going to see a lot of overlap, but the reality is that we're trying to shift to still fit it in the client ecosystem. That's why we do the client portal and the reports and the chat and this stuff, even down to the client score and the user score, because even when we get down to like individual client reporting, again, I'll use been a part of as an example, this stuff is pretty interesting to you. It's much more interesting to the client when you can show them like, hey, in the last quarter you've had, I don't even know what issues. I don't have anything for Benepartum because they're fake. But I've had a bunch of issues for this. So it's like we're also trying to mature up MSPs to not necessarily take number of tickets in and SLA breaches or whatever, trying to be more like what I showed earlier, where it's like, okay, I want to have an outlook, an office issue thing. I want to talk about suppression. I want to talk about changes we can make to fix you up. So in that sense, we're still more client focused on better experience and better service. So again, kind of a long-winded way of saying like I think they're more focused on just service desk efficiency, whereas that is a stepping stone for the better client experience for us, is the fundamental one.
That was a great answer.
It's a long answer. I prattle. Sorry.
It's okay. I think it's appreciated. Y'all asked some great questions today. Thank you guys for all of them. I know we're not going to get to all of them, but we will try to answer as many as we can in our follow-up email or directly. And yeah, thank you. But I think that's all we have on my side for right now.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm doing webinars and meetings and stuff back to back. So I appreciate you guys. Again, thank you so much. We're doing the trial offer still, Crystal. Do we want to plug that before we bounce?
Yes, yes, we put it in the chat a couple times, but it's the bottom part in the chat. Don't forget to go sign up. It is only for the month of February, it's saying, so that means time's ticking.
Yeah, sign up, give it a shot, play around, get some test mode. I'm sure your triage will work where mine maybe look like a fool. But other than that, I think you should give it a shot. Again, take a look. And then with the webinar I just got off of, by the way, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I do like an open office thing, which is basically me kind of doing this, but it's more personal. I let you guys talk. So if you're just like, hey, I tried triage and this isn't working, just that kind of back and forth. So if you're into it and you sign up for it and you need some help, you can always pop in on those and we can talk through it. But thank you guys. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.